Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. Time for the latest episode of the Bird's Eye View with the Mirror's Simon Bird. I'm your host, Andrew Musgrove, and Simon is back on the podcast this week a day earlier because Newcastle United play Chelsea in the League Cup on Wednesday night. Simon, welcome back. You had a good weekend?
Very good, thanks. Yeah, I saw Sunland win, which Newcastle fans won't want to hear about, but they're doing quite well at the moment. We could have North East derbies back next season if it carries on like this. Well, it was good fun. And then I had yesterday off, and today I've been studying. Well, I was seeing Eddie Howe in the morning and studying the Tour de France route for next summer. It was great excitement.
Let's all go. Well, you mentioned that Sunderland doing quite well in the league, and obviously we're going to talk primarily about tomorrow's game against Chelsea and maybe the bigger picture with Eddie Howe's things aren't improving at this moment in time. But there was a big discussion, and I don't know if you saw it towards the end of last week, about Sunderland getting promoted to the Premier League and whether Newcastle United fans want that and want the derby back. What's your thoughts on it? Because you would have covered quite a few derbies in your time at the Mirror.
Derby days, that's probably the worst day to cover, especially if it's a draw, because no one's happy reading your report and everyone thinks you're biased for the other side. So Sunderland fans think you're biased against them, Newcastle fans, vice versa. So it's a really tense, horrible day. For the occasion and for the kind of raw, brutal, unforgiving atmosphere, the unforgiving fallout from those games, I think I do want them back, because they're kind of exciting in a really edgy way. They're not exciting in a kind of life-enhancing way. they're just like real knife-edge, horrible days. But I do want them back. And will Sunderland get promoted? That's a really difficult one. Their budget is tiny compared with some of the more powerful teams in that league, like Leeds and Burnley, who I would expect those two will go up. But Sunderland have got a really good team, very young team, fighting for each other. They're kind of fearless. They're all trying to prove each other, prove themselves, get their careers kick-started. And they've got a very clever manager who they've picked out of nowhere in France, really. And he's extremely tactical. Changed 3 or 4 changes in the game during the game. He's got a great time. He's got them all together. So yeah, it would be. I think they've got a good chance of coming up probably through the playoffs, because it'll get tough in the rest of the season. So, but yeah, I think most Newcastle fans want Sunderland up, but finishing below Newcastle in the league.
Well, let us know in the comments your thoughts on the potential return of the Tyne-Weir derby. Would you want it next season? I'm definitely the camp where I want Sunderland back in the Premier League and I want those derby days back. But I know it's not for everybody. Anyway, Newcastle United have got a huge game on Wednesday evening against Chelsea in the League Cup, just a couple of days after losing to them at Stamford Bridge. We suspect Chelsea will make quite a few changes. Newcastle United not so much, mainly because Eddie Howe hasn't got the options to, but probably more importantly, because he needs to win that game. Simon, you were in the press conference this morning with Eddie Howe. There's a lot to talk about this game being season-defining. What was the atmosphere like in the room? You know, did it come across? Did you sense that Eddie Howe was a little bit nervous, perhaps? You know, what was the atmosphere like in the room, and did it come across as a season-defining game?
Well, I mean, he was asked that very question actually. Does a win define your season here, or a loss define your season? And he says you can call it what you want. They know the importance of the cups. They know the importance of winning this. Whether it defines Eddie Howe, his managerial tenure at Newcastle, if you're going to be really extreme, or whether it just sets a tone of mood and of depression if they lose. If they lose, I think it does. If they lose, I think it makes everyone very downbeat and depressed and gloomy about the season ahead. But if they win, I mean, it really does put the Rockets under the season. They can go into Arsenal confident that they've got a last 8 tie coming up and potentially a semi-final to get through that. So I think it's a big game. I don't think it defines the season, because they've still got the FA Cup to come after that, and they've still got a big programme of games to get themselves revived in the Premier League. It was a kind of a subdued press conference. I think we know the tension, and we've seen the social media storm. There are some fans who are turning, who are saying Newcastle should be looking elsewhere in their managerial. There are the majority of fans, and probably in my view the most sensible ones, are saying, come on, the club haven't really helped Eddie Howe out in the last 2 transfer windows. He needs a chance. He needs to be given more players to try and revamp the squad and get it going again. So it's he knows he clearly knows that there is a kind of a tension going on there behind the scenes, and there was he seemed very keen to address the topic of the crowd booing the Tonali substitutions, and he seemed very keen to get a message across. And managers always come in, or the best ones, with a message talking to the fans and their own players. Now, Eddie Howe's biggest message was that unity is needed. That you've got to have a united front in these dark times. It's all right, everyone saying lovely things about you when you're doing well, but when they haven't won one game in 6, they've not won in the Premier League in 5 games, you need to kind of stick together. And that was Eddie Howe's biggest message from me that I took from that press conference, that when he's trying to send messages to his players. And he's also sending a message saying that he knows that kind of the midfield dynamic and there's various tactical things not quite right with the club, and we can touch on them later. And he's recognised that. And a question about the corners, they've not scored from a corner in 50 attempts this year. So there are issues which he quite openly acknowledges that it's not going brilliantly, but it's also not that far off where they want to be in terms of results and performances. There's fine margins. So
it is fine margins, isn't it? And I think the question about it being season defining is because of the games you've got coming up. You then have Arsenal a few days after. You then have Nottingham Forest, who are absolutely flying, and then the international break, and then you have West Ham, and potentially, I mean, Newcastle United and West Ham could be, battling for some sort of mid-table position, whoever wins that game. So we don't want to get to that point of that Monday night game against West Ham where the pressure is really on Eddie Howe, and that's why I certainly feel like Wednesday is a bit of a must-win game. I'm not saying if he loses it, he's out the door, because I don't think that's going to happen at all. I think, he's got the backing of the majority of the fans, and he's got the backing of the board as well. But at the same time, to go out with the cup and then expect the result against Arsenal on the Saturday, who aren't at their best, but are still one of the best sides in the league, that's a daunting challenge. And then Forest coming up, a team that you expect Newcastle United to be well ahead of, that's a difficult game to pick up 3 points when you find yourself in this rut as well. So for me, Wednesdays, it's a huge, huge game, because it's not just about Wednesday, it's about the impact afterwards. And as you say, if they win that, set yourself up nicely for Saturday, and then the game for Forest as well. So it works both ways, but I certainly think it's a huge evening for Newcastle United on Wednesday. And we do have a lot of questions have come in over email, Simon. And Henry wrote in to ask, if Newcastle lose to Chelsea on Wednesday, do you think Howe's job is under threat?
I think there'll be more people questioning it. I think there'll be more people in the fan base questioning it. He's approaching his 3rd anniversary in the job this next week. I think it is next week on Friday. So he's had 3 years. He has rebuilt the squad, and he's built it to a level where they're obviously 4th in Champions League and stuff. But to see it regress, if it was going to permanently regress this season, and this is going to be a mid-table season, people will say, well, how far have the club come? Other people, they might have done well early on and spent a lot of money and got the signings right and revamped it and changed the tactics, and it works. But have other clubs leapfrogged them, which they clearly have, by the way. So other clubs leapfrogged them. So how far has Eddie Howe actually brought the club? I mean, the only one thing that I think he's owed, at least this season, and then you look at it in the summer, if it is a bad season, we don't know if it's going to be a bad season. If it is going to be a mid-table season with no cup wins, I think he's still got the season. I mean, I don't think there's no point in making a change mid-table. I think there is a difficult, we look at Man United situation. They've backed Ten Hag in the summer because he won the FA Cup, which God, Newcastle fans, and we all would, it'd be a hero if he did that at Newcastle. But then he's still been uncertain in his position, Ten Hag, and then they've bought more players for him to fit into his system. And then 2 months later, they're going to replace him with a coach who plays 3 at the back, 3-4-3, and who knows whether those players will fit in. So there might be an argument to look at Eddie Howe and say, how much money is he going to get in January? Is he going to get his players, or the club going to sign the players that they want? And how much money if he's not doing well and it's not improving, how much money do you give a manager there's a little bit of doubt under? But I mean, I think he needs. Who else do you get? I mean, it would be nice to see a club stick with a manager and see how he can rebuild a second team. The rebuilding is always the most important, the toughest thing to do when you've been in the job a long time. People have heard your routines, they know the training, they might get a bit stale, might be a bit unchallenged. Rebuilding a side is the hardest thing, but he is a smart guy. So you'd think, given the backing, he could be flexible and rebuild. One of the things he said in the press conference today was he's kind of got to stay calm and consistent, but he did importantly say, but that's not at the expense of just doing the same thing all the time and flogging it if it's not working. So he has there's an element of that press conference today where he's recognised that there might be a bit of change needed, and that he might have to shake things up personnel wise. Tactically, that'd be a big move because he has not done that for a while. So there's an acknowledgement that things have got to change a little bit.
I think if he does change things up, which, like you say, would be a bit of a surprise and a bit of a shock because he doesn't tend to do that. We've seen him do it a couple of times and then revert back to his tested and tried methods. But I think that would actually be applauded by some of those who are going in on him, because I think that one of the biggest criticisms at the moment is that it's just repeat, and we're not actually seeing the results on the pitch. It has improved. I don't think anyone can deny that. But we are now heading into November. And as we said on the Monday show earlier in the week, there's only so many more days and weeks that is a valid thing to say before the real questions start to get asked. We've got a question here from Lee in Berwick who emailed in, and he writes, it seems slightly unfair that if the results continue to go against Eddie Howe, he would be the one to get sacked, while those who failed him in the summer window would keep their job.
Yeah, that's the way football works, isn't it? It's always the manager's job on the line. It's never the players who have lost the games after crossing the white line and having to perform who lose their jobs. It's never the people in the boardroom who have not spent money or spent it badly or spent it too quickly and then left the club in a problem. It's always the manager's job on the line, and that's kind of the pressure of football management. I think Eddie Howe would be due a lot of compensation. He'd take a lot of staff with him wherever he was going next if he was ever to leave. So I think it's probably kind of an unaffordable, unpalatable thing for the club to want to do at the moment. But we do watch his relationship in this January with Paul Mitchell and whether they can kind of conspire together, work together to get a good transfer plan and actually get people through the door, at least two. We do watch whether how well that works, because Paul Mitchell said to us he was part of the committee who would be like kind of hiring and firing when we saw him a couple of months ago. So that's an interesting dynamic to watch, as well as the results, and also the unknown factor of the people in Riyadh and Saudi who are looking at the investment and might just go, we just don't know how they think. They might just seek some kind of crazy show business appointment, which wasn't really what the club was meant to be all about. We don't know how they're going to react to a prolonged bad run of results.
Well, we've got another question in actually regarding the public investment fund's interest in Newcastle United and whether it remains as high as it once was, because the chairman has been speaking at an investment event over in Riyadh. So we'll get into that question in a moment. But I just wanted to ask you, in terms of the failure in the summer, because we keep going back to it, and for me, it is the biggest reason to why Newcastle United aren't flying high right now. But in terms of the defence of Eddie Howe, how, if we're saying out of 100, like 100%, how far percentage-wise is that the reason? And then, and then how far do we look at Eddie Howe's tactics and his personnel? So, like, for me, it's like 65, 70% the reason, and then you have other elements that take it, take the rest of the blame, sort of thing. But for you, what kind of percentage are you putting on it?
So you think 75% of the reason for the kind of dip at the minute is because they didn't sign in the summer?
Yeah,
I would put it quite a lot less than that. I would go maybe.
This is the reason I asked.
I would say maybe 50-50. I think you need new players to stimulate the existing players, to challenge them, to get them excited, to convince them the project's still going ahead and moving forward, and they're going to achieve things in their own careers. Because the better players they've got around them, the more excited they're going to be about the project. But I think it's a lot about people losing form and confidence. And Eddie Howe referenced confidence being lost, an element of confidence being lost in the press conference today. I think a lot of players who excelled a couple of seasons ago and massively overachieved after being involved in relegation the year before. I mean, that kind of steep climb, and then kind of fall. They're kind of suffering for that now because of the expectation that everyone thought it was going to be an easy route to the top for the club consistently, and it's not. I think a lot of people. I think players are losing form. I think the centre back pairing at the minute is at the root of it, and we're going to discuss that later. Why? I think they don't know whether to go and into the midfield and intimidate and mark and nick the ball, or to back off. And I think at the minute, because the pace of the two of them, Burn and Shaw, they're kind of backing off, or they certainly were the first 15 minutes, and it was leaving massive gaps. So the midfield three can't press, and also being a kind of medium block and a kind of covering for the back four as well. So I think a lot of it is down to lost form, the centre back pairing. Isaac not scoring goals, the chances they've missed, like the penalty. You take Isaac's chance against Brighton and the missed penalty, Anthony Gordon against Everton. Things are looking a lot different. So there's minute at this stage of the season, everything's exaggerated, amplified in terms of on the way up, or is there a crisis? So we're coming to 10 games. I think they do look like a mid-table side this year. It's a bit flat. Things haven't gelled. I think they've got to get Tonali functioning right. Eddie Howe talked about that today, admitting it wasn't perfect, and relationships have got to be built with Bruno and the midfield a little bit better. So I think it's more players losing form, tactics being worked out, intensity being lost, rather than that you're saying 75-25. I'm saying 50-50.
I just think that comes from not bringing in, as you've mentioned, they're not bringing a new player to freshen things up. I think people have got comfortable, and Eddie Howe's maybe got a little bit comfortable with the personnel. No one's coming in and rocking the boat for spaces in that team. We talk about players out of form, but we can't talk about players of the same level and ability coming in to replace them because they aren't there. So I think for me, it is around kind of 65-70% down to the lack of investment in the summer. That being said, there are some changes which I think I would have made if I was manager, and maybe the way to freshen it up between now and January is to change tactically. We know how it doesn't do that, but I do certainly think just little things like potentially even introducing Sanusi on Wednesday night. I know I was never going to do that in a million months of Sunday, but just something to get the fans off their seat and just something a little bit different. So this constant, predictable kind of Eddie Howe way, which has worked fine. But I just think when you're heading down a dangerous road, sometimes what you need to do is maybe roll the dice and just gamble a little bit. And like I say, I don't think Eddie Howe will do that. And he's still got my back 100%. I think he will turn it around, but I'm just trying to think of ways he can freshen it up before they can actually go and buy players in January. And, the point there is, Simon, if you are languishing in mid-table, it's going to be a lot harder to persuade players to join you than if you're, fifth or sixth, just a couple of points out of the top four, what have you. So it's a big few months for Newcastle United, and certainly a League Cup final would work well when you're trying to have the sales pitch, as would be in the top 10 as well. The question about the Public Investment Fund. Now, as I mentioned, the chairman, Yasser Al-Rahman, was speaking at an investment kind of event in Riyadh, and he was talking about the Public Investment Fund's history, their success, and where it's leading to. And one of the lines that has come out of that is that they're looking to reduce their investment abroad. I think he said it was something like about 30% now, but they're looking to get it down to 18-20%. And as usual, we've had two camps on Twitter, on X. Means the Public Investment Fund are losing interest, they're going goodbye. The other half saying, well, look, he's probably talking about future investments rather than diluting their stake in Newcastle United. But there have been questions, Simon, haven't there, over recent weeks and months about the Public Investment Fund's interest in Newcastle. Is it as high as it once was? I mean, I was asked about it on Sunday at a family gathering. I just said, well, look, you can't spend the money. It's not like they're disinterested. They just can't spend the wealth they've got. So it's always going to be.
They could get the money in. They could put money in.
Well, yes, we know your thoughts on that, but it's. Go on.
I mean,
Go on.
sponsorship deals, stadium sponsorship deals, sleeve sponsors, training ground sponsors. If they wanted to shovel money into Newcastle, they would have been doing it by now. And there are other ways for them to do it, and it hasn't happened. There are
That
some
sounds
companies
like.
that have been involved.
Do you think that their interest maybe is not as high as it once was? Is that what you're getting at there, or?
I think maybe when they came in, their interest was to make it like a Man City, and then they've realised that there's a really difficult route ahead to do that because the rules are very different from when Man City was bought, and they're years behind all the rivals. And they've built the club up. So, I mean, they bought the club for 305 million. They're now valuing it at $1 billion. So they've trebled their money. So that's been a good overseas investment for them. But I think when they came in, Newcastle fans celebrated and assumed that it was going to be a bottomless pit of money available to Newcastle. And really, it should be. I mean, they own the richest company in the world, Aramco, the Saudi oil company. And if they wanted to sponsor Newcastle, they could get tens of millions more into the club if they wanted to increase, but they haven't done that because I think it's being run as a business and an investment, and they want returns for the money they're putting in from their own businesses. They're not going to just throw money at a football club that's in the northeast of England who are 10th for without thinking there's going to be a return. Now I saw that speech today by Al Ramayan. I mean, obviously we don't know. I mean, that's a macro kind of big picture view of how the Saudi PF is investing around the world, and Newcastle is a micro dot in that investment portfolio, and it's minuscule. So we don't know how that's going to affect Newcastle. But I mean, safe to say, if we're discussing like we have done in the past, stadium redevelopment, if they need £1 billion, £700 million for a stadium redevelopment, and that's not really going to pay for itself very well, or it's going to be a very, very long-term investment, then are they going to be doing cutbacks and stumping up £1 billion for a new stadium? It's an interesting question to ask. I mean, we'll soon find out. But I mean, it depends what Newcastle's priority is. I think that's like I said a few weeks ago, that's the biggest test, the stadium redevelopment on how interested they are in making Newcastle a super club, and we'll have to wait for the results of that. But yeah, it could affect Newcastle.
Yeah, there's probably a couple of tests coming down the road which will really show just how much they are invested in the club. But I still think, that they're heavily invested in it, and they want to turn it into success. It's maybe just going to take a little bit longer than we all had hoped and than they maybe anticipated. There was another question that has come in. I mean, we've had quite a few come in over email, which is absolutely fantastic to see. So thank you very much for sending them in. We've had Christian send one in. He says, "Love the pod. Keep up the good work. We've now had 50 corners this Premier League season. We have scored 0 goals from corners. It's not just the fact that Trippier as provider has reduced minutes. There is more to it. Why are we not a threat on set pieces anymore? What is going on?"
Yeah, a colleague asked Eddie Howe, had spotted that stat over the last few weeks, that they weren't scoring, no goals from corners, and there's been 50 corners for Newcastle this year, so they've not scored in 50. Now, Eddie Howe told us this morning, there is an analyst who's in charge of analysing set pieces, presumably for Newcastle and for the opposition, to keep the ball out at the other end. So there's a data analyst who's spotting the patterns and the running patterns and the moves everyone's doing, and then I think Jason Tyndall's actually in charge of organising Newcastle's set pieces. And obviously Arsenal have proven that you can score from corners these days. I mean, it's kind of an unfashionable way to score, but Arsenal have really nailed that, and as part of their game plan this season, and Newcastle haven't. I mean, part of it is that you're lacking Sven Botman, who's 6'5", and if you haven't got him in the box, that's going to be a problem. You've got Dan Burn in there, but physically Newcastle aren't quite as big without those players. Fab Shaw's not a big centre half, and Eddie did mention this morning that the delivery, they haven't got their corner taker is Kieran Trippier, and his delivery, you can't underestimate how good it is. And if he's putting 50 corners in, he's going to put it on the nail where they want it more times than other teammates are taking the corner. So there is a delivery thing as well. So it's a strange one, isn't it? I think Newcastle really aren't a set piece team to be scoring from corners because of their physicality. But maybe you'd get the odd one. I mean, headers direct from corners are kind of rare unless you've really worked a brilliant blocking kind of American football style clean out move to get your man free. So that's a difficult one. It's certainly one to score from set pieces, and it's certainly been noted within the club.
Yeah, one to work on. And before we get on to what else was said in the press conference, just a reminder that this podcast is brought to you by NordVPN, and we thank NordVPN for sponsoring the podcast. We've got a very special discount offer for our viewers and our listeners. Head to nordvpn.com/tune, where you can get the very best discount off your NordVPN plan. Our link will also give you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. There's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link will be in the podcast episode description box. And as I say, use this myself. I can't recommend it highly enough. Just gives you that peace of mind when you are working in a cafe, whether you're on the bus and you're heading into work and you've got to do a bit of writing or a bit of editing before you get to the office. NordVPN protects all your details, your bank details, your passwords, your online identity, all your content. It is well worth having. And remember, one NordVPN account can be used on up to 10 devices. I've also got it on my phone, so it's nice to have it on there and be protected as well. So do head over to nordvpn.com/tune for a brilliant discount offer. As we said, Simon, you were in the press conference this morning, and we've had a few questions emailed in regarding how the journalists who are lucky enough to be in the press room on Eddie Howe's pre-match press conferences and how they kind of question him, especially when things are going bad. So I'll just read out this question from Scott, and then we'll get your take on it. So it says, "Hi guys, I don't mean this to be disrespectful, but see it as more constructive feedback," he writes. "Press conferences for us are, in his opinion, the least informative out of any club in the league. There's been a feeling since Howe came in that the press pack are unwilling to criticise Howe and treat him far differently than they did others such as Bruce. Today's toughest question was about set pieces, which was a low bar. Some question our midfield. Howe answered again that he saw no problems there. He actually said, I don't think it was perfect, is what he said. But anyway, and not a single member of the press pack took him to task." Simon, what would you say to Scott and others who are maybe a little bit critical of the questions being asked of Eddie Howe? How do you take Eddie Howe to task, especially when things aren't going very well?
Well, this is a theme of through a lot of the managers who we've worked with and who we've seen do well, and then towards the end of their reign do badly. Fans basically want journalists to go in the press conference room and kind of hector a manager and kind of basically shout that you're a lot of rubbish. What are you doing? So, but it's all about tone, and as journalists, we're striking a tone between kind of representing the anger or the concerns of the fans that they've got in our questions, but also like kind of drawing a decent answer or a kind of thoughtful answer out of a manager. And so today, if you look at the video right at the end, I asked the question, which was, you've managed a club on the up. How difficult is it being a manager and managing it when you're in a dip? Do you think you're in a dip? But how is leadership harder at that point? Now, I could have said, Eddie, it's going wrong for you. It's terrible. What are you going to do about it? And that would have got Eddie Howe's back up. He's just going to say, what an idiot you are, and he's just going to bristle. He's not going to answer it. But I would try to word it in a way where he's thinking about his leadership and he's giving you what he's doing behind the scenes to change things. The unity quote came out of that, how suggesting that everything hadn't been united on and off the pitch. So you've got to word it in a certain way. We can't go in there. I think that there does come a point, or does come a point in a manager's reign or a relation or press relationships with manager where you are just sitting there and you will fire direct questions at him, like, Eddie, are you under pressure? Or Eddie, are you going to resign today? I asked him the other week a subtle question, which we will be thinking about if the run continues and they're still doing badly. I asked him whether he thought managers had a shelf life for the club. And I was kind of exploring whether he in the rebuild, terms of rebuilding this team, he thought he could do it, and that's kind of why I subtly asked that question. And he said yes, they do have a shelf life, and I think there's a time comes, and a manager knows it when your race is run at a club and you've been there too long, and you maybe should leave. And he said all that, but then he qualified it. He said, but I haven't reached my shelf life yet. I've got a lot to give here. I love being here. We can keep this going. So there are subtle ways and cleverer ways than just like directly, kind of knocking a manager. I mean, knocking a manager is kind of a technique as well. And we can be brutal and kind of just do really short questions and rattle them a little bit. We're not at that stage with Eddie Howe. I mean, Eddie, you'll probably start worrying when we are, and we start asking a few more direct questions. So, yeah, we can't go in there too confrontational at the moment. But if Eddie, and that's partly because Eddie Howe is kind of so rational and reasoned in his answers. So if a manager is telling you the opposite of what you've just witnessed on the pitch, for instance, then you're going to challenge him, and you're going to challenge him in a direct way and say, come on, we didn't see that game. Your defense is falling apart, whatever. We're going to challenge him. But because he's quite honest and because he's quite eloquent and clever in the way he answers, it doesn't come across as confrontational, and probably fans feel let down by that. But we are probing kind of gently. Have you got a shelf life? What's it like to be in a dip? How are you managerially wise? How are you kind of turning this round? And what's it feel like when the mood's changing? Have you got to change the mood around this place? And we're kind of just getting him to talk about the problems he's having in a more subtle way than probably maybe fans would want. However, if I can carry on, but recently, obviously, you're seeing the entire press conference now on the club website, and they're basically, the club are taking all the journalists' questions from national newspapers, TV, and local newspapers, and it's just going out. So you're seeing the whole thing, and it's all very stilted and broadcast and filmed. So Eddie Howe is kind of probably on his guard a little bit and very formal in the way he's answering us. In the past, and people won't know behind the scenes what's gone on in the past, but the TVs have usually filmed their questions, and then the cameras have been switched off, and we sat down in a huddle then with Steve Bruce, with Rafa Benitez, with Alan Pardew, and newspapers and websites have then had their own sections, sometimes with Rafa, up to an hour, 45 minutes, chewing the fat about football, telling us all his stories, loads off the record, really good, scandalous stuff and interesting stuff. And we don't get that now. So that relationship that we had with managers in the past, Bruce, Rafa, Pardew, all the ones before that, we've always sat down in a very intimate huddle, just newspapers, and asked those questions. And we've got far better copy because of it. Copy which has helped the manager a lot more and helped the club a lot more. But now it's all filmed, it's all banged out on the club website. It's a lot more formal, and I don't think we get as much out of it as we used to as a service to fans.
And do you think Eddie Howe would benefit from having that chance to sit down without the cameras on, with the written press pack, and have that chance to maybe get those messages out, whether it be on or off the record?
I think he would, because he could. There's quite a lot of times where we've asked a question and the manager's gone, "This is off the record, lads. Look, this is what's really happened. We think we're concerned about this. Well, what can you say on the record about it?" And he'll say something about it. So we've got a broader picture. We've all got a broader picture of the problems he's dealing with, personalities he's dealing with, and problems at the top of the club maybe. So it's been a much more rounded relationship with other managers, which is, and the modern way now is just for clubs to video it all, and that's it. And I don't think that kind of it's not old school, because it's very recent when we used to do that. And Rafa was the master at it. We'd have some amazing. If we'd recorded everything that Rafa had said to us, you could make a book out of it, or about his time at Real Madrid and Liverpool and all the funny stories. And sometimes they'll tell you a funny story and say, "Can we just use that on the record?" And it gives you another dimension to the coverage, rather than it being a formal press conference about the last game, the next game, a couple of players, whatever. I think they get more out of it. If we did it once this season, we did it in Germany at the pre-season training camp, where there was about 6 or 7 of us who were in a room at Adidas HQ, and we sat down with Eddie Howe then, and obviously the quotes from that were dynamite and set the agenda. Were on the back pages about the England job, about him being a little bit unsettled by all the changes going on at the club. So I do think it helps. And I think maybe he did that at Bournemouth as well. I think it would help if you could do that, even occasionally. If you could do that, it would help.
It's getting that balance, but let us know in the comments what you think there about Simon's explanation. I'm sure it's provided some insight.
It would be really interesting to know what fans think we should ask. And usually they put the list of questions I see in comments or whatever. We have actually asked those questions and they've missed the answers, but we generally do. We put thought into it. We have a little discussion before the press conference on who's going to ask what. Anyone got any ideas? So it's a collaborative thing. Even though we're rival newspapers, it is kind of a collaborative thing that we've got to make this thing work, and we've got to make it flow, and we've got to get Eddie talking in a kind of open way. And generally, he does really, really well at that. Yeah.
Tomorrow, then, the team we mentioned right at the start. We don't think Eddie Howe will make too many changes, but he was asked potentially about resting Bruno, and that obviously then led to questions to whether Lewis Miley could possibly start. He said he had to handle Miley carefully. Do you think we'll see any changes at all?
I think he'd like to, because Bruno's played for Brazil and a lot of minutes, and he admitted they were watching that. But I don't see how he can do anything but his number one team, the team that he thinks is absolutely the best team to win that game against very tough opponents. I think he leaves himself open to. I mean, I can see the argument for like changing a little bit and having a bench with Bruno on, or is that for changing a game? But you need to be in the game to change it. So I think you've got to go flat out and try and win it with your best team, and maybe worry about the Arsenal game later. I think it's very much play what you've got in front of you. They haven't had Europe this year, so they haven't had all those games. So you've got to pick your best team. I think the only elements of doubt would be whether Gordon's coming back. And there was a kind of a hint in the press conference today where Eddie said, well, it's not too bad, but we've also got to look at the Arsenal game, which put a little thing in your head, which, well, maybe he's not quite ready. Maybe he'll be on the bench. And if they need him, he can come on for 20. That means begs the question, who do you play right wing? Is it Murphy or Almiron? My other one would be the other doubt. I would still pick that midfield three and see if they can function, because they kind of got the tactics right. They were in the game towards the end. It wasn't a terrible second half. They were getting forward. The only thing would be getting the centre half pairing right, and Lloyd Kelly's probably ready for a game. And I think Dan Burn had problems, well, so did Shaw, picking people up, whether to drop off, whether to go forward and get pulled out of the defence. And the lack of pace there is a slight concern. We don't know who Chelsea are going to play. Probably Palmer's not even going to figure. But they've got a whole reserve team who are worth 400 million. So I think Lloyd Kelly might be in line for kind of the left side of centre half berth, but then you lose Burns' physicality and leadership. That would have to be a debate for me. What you do with the defence, and whether you think they knuckled it down well enough to deserve just keep it the same, or whether you give Kelly a shot.
Yeah.
So yeah,
maybe comes in for Fabian Schär, because neither Schär or Burn covered themselves in glory on Sunday. But just to go back to the question that I asked right at the start, Simon, before I get your score prediction for tomorrow night. I mean, just how important is a victory for Newcastle in the Cup on Wednesday?
It is massive. I mean, Newcastle have two things to win this year, two things to have a shot at: the FA Cup and the Carabao Cup. It's two things. This is the cup they can win, because it's the cup that other people will rest players for until the semi-final, and you can get to the semi-final by playing well and playing your first team, or Newcastle should be capable of doing that. So they've got a home draw as well, which kind of strengthens it. It is huge. They've got to win this game. They've got to keep momentum going. Momentum's ebbed away a little bit this season and over the summer, and a little bit towards last season when they didn't get into Europe. This keeps it kind of alive, keeps it interesting. There's still a possibility of a trip to Wembley. They want to make memories. They want to make for themselves and their own careers, and they want to make them for the fans, and they need to stay in the cup. And yeah, it's a huge game. I think they're going to need the crowd to be positive and forgiving if things are going wrong. They need the crowd to be behind them. And that kind of atmosphere against Chelsea has really paid off in the last few years. Chelsea don't like it when the Newcastle crowd's at them. So if the crowd can be at them and it transmits to the players, then it's going to create a much better environment than anyone who's booing or moaning or tutting and all that kind of thing. I think Eddie Howe just he's had the backing of everyone magnificently, and he just wants it again because they're very much part of his team in a situation like this.
Go on then, score. Give us a score.
Well, I'm quite optimistic. I mean, Chelsea aren't brilliant at Newcastle. They don't like the trip, and they're going to mess around with their first team. And my honest gut feeling is that Newcastle are going to get through this. They're going to do it 2-1. Who knows? Might be dramatic penalty shootout, but we really don't care. My gut feeling is that they're going to fall the right side of the margins this time, and we'll have a quarter final to look forward to in December.
Fingers crossed you are correct. I think that we'll get through as well. I'm going to go 2-1, 1-0. It's going to be a close game, but I think being at home under the lights and knowing just how important it is that Newcastle get through this, it's going to create a cauldron, isn't it? It's going to be a really good atmosphere. And as you said, Chelsea are often rattled when they come up to St James's Park and can't handle what the fan base can give Newcastle United. So fingers crossed they do get through. Simon, thank you as always for popping on to the podcast. You guys watching and listening, you know what to do. Give the video a thumbs up on YouTube. Leave us a rating and review on the podcast channel. And remember to click that link in the podcast description for your discounted offer on NordVPN. And for myself and Simon, we shall see you guys next week.